Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's June the 15th, 2015. This is Stew Webb here on the VeteransTruthNetwork.com. And for all those of you listening, I have a special two guests tonight. It's going to be really fun to hear what they have to say. Now, to them, it's not so much fun because they're federal whistleblowers. Many of you probably have never heard of these two. And but before I get into them, I just want to mention that we have the satanic worship in Denver, Colorado that was busted and go to stewwebb.com and take a look at mainstream media out of Oklahoma City where they busted the guy stealing a child of a Walmart for the Illuminati sacrifice. That will be on June the 20th at about 8 p.m. it starts. It'll be downtown at the Brown Palace Hotel at the Ship's Tavern, and watch George Herbert Walker Bush and Henry Kissinger and Meyer Rothschild and Larry Mizell and a whole canopy of these cats and gators going through the Ship's Tavern and between the restrooms down there into the tunnel across the way, and from 12 to 3 a.m. Please be over there pounding on the doors. I know a lot of the We Are Change and Occupy Colorado are going to be there this year, so get out there and join them, folks, and get your cameras ready because you're going to see very, very high-level satanic Satanists down there. And with that said, we're going to have a full week of special guests. I've got some really two hardcore coming on. I think you're going to hear them here in a minute. I say hardcore. Got a hell of a story to tell. But we're also going to have this on tomorrow night, and my guest tomorrow night, unknown, unsaid, and also on Thursday. But tonight, James Joann Moriarty are on with me. And they were in Libya, folks, when Benghazi went down. They were businessmen and women over there selling enzyme products. And I'm just going to let them rock and roll with this. This ties in with Al-Qaeda, ISIS. This ties in with so many things. And even the dinar, for many of you that don't know about the dinar scam, the first money that they confiscated from Iraq. But then Gaddafi created his own dinar. And it's going to be an interesting story. And with that said, Jim, Joann, welcome.
Stu, thank you so much. It's our honor to be on your show. We listen to you all the time, and you all are doing great work.
I thank you for that. And I want to tell you, after talking to you two today, and Gene Chip Tatum's the one that told me for a week to get a hold of you, and he had talked to you previously about this and mentioned it on one of his shows. You two, Gene checked you out. You're solid as a rock, so that's the reason you're here with me tonight. And he's got more connections than I do. And I just want you to start with your story, folks, both of you. I want you to tell everybody your background, just like you did with me today in our conversation.
Okay, well, we're really business people. We really have not been politically active or anything like that. Last thing we ever thought we'd be at this point in lives is doing what we're doing. But we own a proprietary product that rejuvenates oil wells and cleans up pipelines and sludge pits. We successfully rejuvenated 7,000 oil wells worldwide, less than 100 failures. We really have no peers. What we do is we do a medical grade DNA manipulation of microbes, and then we kill all living portion off, and we custom blend enzymes to do different things to oil. We pipeline sludge pits, chicken fat, any kind of oil that's a little sticky, we can manipulate it. And very, very successful product. And we had 2 factories in China, and we couldn't get the Chinese to pay us right. So we were looking for a new market. And of course, Libya had no modern technology in over 38 years. They had been locked out by embargoes and everything. And before the embargoes, Libya made 3.7 million barrels of oil a day. They were down to less than 1 million barrels when we went into Libya. And we actually arrived in Libya the first time, January 1st, 2007. That was right after the treaty was signed between Condoleezza Rice and Gaddafi. And in that treaty, Gaddafi stepped down, and a guy named Baghdadi was elected the prime minister. And we arrived there really to see how crazy Libya was, because we'd heard all these stories about they were terrorists and terrible people. And we went in there for 5 days and had 4 security guards with us, one at each corner, And after 2 days, we sent security home. We had better security and less trouble in Libya than you'd have on any street in Houston. So, we met with the National Oil Company there, and one of the reservoir engineers asked us to stay over because he said there's a lot of people in the government really interested in your product and interested in finding out about the outside world. And so we spent an extra 2 weeks there. We met with ministers every night. They really were like sponges. They want to know about how to do business in the Western world. And in the end, they signed a contract with us to treat 2,500 of their monster wells. That was worth about $600 million to $1 billion worth of our product. That was unbelievable to have that kind of success first shot out of the barrel. So we then had to turn around and find out how to do business in Libya and what the pitfalls were. And Libya was not a perfect place. They had a terrible mafia problem, if you would, that didn't have anything to do with Gaddafi. This had to do with the Turkish car giants that moved into Libya about 150 years ago. They supposedly converted to Islam, set up Misrata. And since the Libyans are non-confrontational people, and these car giants are absolutely confrontational, they started strong-arming everything there. They received 60% of all the contracts without a bid or tender. The other 40% of the contracts were let legitimately. They then subcontracted with foreign construction companies and then wouldn't pay them and blackmail them and everything else. And that's why 150 major contracts had been abandoned by the foreign developers. Lost money on all of them. So we looked into the country. Took us almost 2 years to really find out how we could become a legitimate Libyan company and be paid directly and not have to be paid as a subcontractor. And then we started looking for a Libyan partner because we actually don't do the in-field work. We do our magic in the laboratory and in our production facility. And then we let a local company really make most of the money and do the treatments and everything. And we finally found that right partner, and I signed the contract, joint venture contract with them the 2nd of January, 2011. And that company was the Social Security Investment Fund of John Zeuer. It was a $16 billion fund, and the beneficiaries were the retirees from all the oil and gas industry in Libya, the National Oil Company, the oil producers, the oil field service companies. So those were really perfect partners for us. And that was in the 2nd of January, 2011.
Now, some
3 or 4 days later, I did.
Jim, your competition was what? Halliburton and companies like that?
Oh. Yeah, we beat them every time we had to compete with them. But Halliburton, Schlumberger, all the big oil field service companies. And where our treatments, for example, on an oil well last 3 years, theirs last about 45 days. We never patented what we do because if we did, we'd be giving away the keys to the gold mine, if you would. So we control our technology with our own production. We produce all of it ourselves. And after I signed a joint venture with the Social Security Investment Fund, I signed a contract to locate our new production plant in the new free zone, which was being built near Tunisia. We then ordered all materials in to build a large-scale enzyme production plant, about $100 million worth of materials to build the plant. We brought in about another $100 million worth of feedstock, enough to produce our enzymes for about 2 years. Those arrived, of course, in March and April after NATO, the UN, blew the country up. So that was a total loss to us. But and I was there until the 8th of February, 2011. The false flag operation that caused the destruction of Libya started the 18th of February, 2011. Joann and I started, we were talking to the Libyans all the time. We heard that the United States was actually backing Al-Qaeda and Muslim Brotherhood and Ansar al-Sharia, all these really bad guys. And so we started trying to communicate with everybody we could in the government here in the United States, trying to let them know that the government was wrong-footed. And, we were supporting the wrong side.
Okay. Hi, Stu. This is Joann. I wanted to go and talk a little bit about Libya, just what Libya was, because most people don't understand. First of all, there were some radical Islamists in Libya. They probably were 3 to 4%. And most of those people were in exile or did not live in Libya because Gaddafi it was not acceptable in Libya to be a radical Islamist. There was a part of the Quran that was added to the Quran by the Ayatollah Khomeini at some point in time about this infidels being chopped up and stuff. And Gaddafi threw that out. He would not allow that in the country. And for that, he had a fatwa, a kill order put on him for 20 years. Also, because of that, the radical Islamists were not there. So Libya was an incredibly progressive Muslim country. It was secular. They had Catholics and Jews. They had all kinds of religions there that were welcome there. Nobody bothered them, and they were protected by the state. But the government of Libya had gone to begin to develop after the bloodless coup in 1969, when the old despot king that was put in there by the British, there was never any kings in Libya. He was just installed there for the oil companies. The Libyan people were the poorest, least developed country in Africa. Their average salary was 60 dinar a year, and they were basically the slaves of the Italians who occupied Libya. They never owned any of their own land. In the whole history of Libya, in 8,000 years, the Libyans at that point had never owned their own land. When the bloodless coup took place, when 11 tribes came together and the leaders were military, the old king just ran off. He was a despot and he just ran off. And those 11 leaders appointed Gaddafi. He was young, he was charismatic, he was educated, and he took over at that point in time. And the first thing he did was give every Libyan who was working on the land in Libya, he gave the land to them. First time in their history. And he began to develop the country. Libya had the most developed country in Africa. In that 40-year span, it became the most developed country in Africa.
They had the highest pay scale of Africa at $15,700 a person. That was higher than China, higher than India. They were the highest educated of any country in Africa, with about 93% literacy in men and 80% in literacy in women. The government was building 620,000 new condominiums when we first went in there. That they were 2,000 square foot each and up, and you paid 10% of your salary for 20 years, and the house was yours. All your utilities were paid, your electricity, your natural gas, etc. Gasoline was 44 cents a gallon. Your first car cost you half of dealer invoice. Your hospitalization was paid. And if you could not get the hospitalization you needed or the medical care you needed in Libya, then the government paid you to go anywhere in the world to get the medical treatment. Not only did they pay your medical expenses and costs, they paid your travel expenses and the expenses of a family member to travel with you. Education was fully paid. Sir?
So the Libyan government was like dreamland to its people.
Yeah.
Oh, they were sharing. They spent 49% of their income to support the government. The rest of it, they participated most of that out for the Libyan people.
About 6.5 million Libyan people. And when a couple got married, they were given a gift of $47,000. When a baby was born, they got a gift of $5,000. And women were emancipated in the 1970s by Gaddafi. Women were doctors, lawyers. They drove. They were teachers. They were entrepreneurs.
They owned their own businesses.
Yeah,
you know.
they were in the military. They absolutely had a great life in Libya. They weren't restricted in Libya. In fact, right before the war, there was a new law passed that women in a divorce were given, if there was a divorce, the women were given the house and they got a stipend from their husband by law. And if he didn't give the stipend, then his family had to, and his family didn't, then the tribe had to.
So it was a tribal culture. Also, your education was fully paid to whatever extent your brain would support. If you were smart enough to study outside of Libya, then the government paid tuition, fees, cost, books, and a living stipend. We had a young man we knew that was studying for his doctorate in England. He had a wife and 4 kids. His monthly stipend was £4,500. That's over $7,500 a month to live on while he was in university. You had a country that was really developing. In the years from 2007 till 2011. We saw so much development in Libya. It was really surprising. Now, I've got to tell you, Joann and I never met or did any business with Gaddafi, any of his sons, daughters, or anything. We really stayed out of the political arena. And but we ended up doing a lot of business with the tribes. In the 4 years we were going to Libya, we were there 17 times. We were there never less than 30 days at a time, sometimes as much as 3 months at a time.
We saw more of Libya than most Libyans.
Yeah, we travel all over Libya. Every time we go there, we'd get a new contract. We actually had booked $5 billion worth of our enzymes to be sold into Libya. So we were doing a great amount of business, legitimate business. And we got to know the Libyans from one side of the country to the other. And it was not the place we heard of in the news. Another thing, when the false flag operation started, that was in February 18th, 2011. The first week of February of 2011, the U.S. Department of Defense declared Gaddafi and the Libyans the greatest partner asset the United States had in its fight against terrorism. 2 or 3 weeks later, the bought and paid for media was saying Gaddafi was the worst SOB that ever drew a breath. So, the truth was not in them. The reason that Libya was blown up, and I'll cover that real quick. The first thing, you mentioned it, Gaddafi had, when he resigned from office, he didn't like the banking cabal. He didn't like them at all. In fact, when we were first in Libya, there were no links to international banks at all. Since we were staying longer and they didn't take credit cards or anything, we had to go bring in some more cash. And their international bank at that time was Western Union. So we liked that. We don't like the bankers much anyhow. And so they're not having any relationship was a positive thing for us. But Libya was required to invest heavily in the Federal Reserve and in Euroclear to be allowed to start doing business internationally. So at the time they blew Libya up, and this is beginning in February of 2011, Libya had $241 billion in the Federal Reserve in cash and cash equivalents. They had 150 billion euros in Euroclear. Libya had 39 billion in cash in the country. They had 179 tons of gold, 2,000 tons of silver, lots of tons of every other heavy earth and rare earth that you've ever heard of. So when they started blowing up Libya, within a week of the revolution, quote unquote, first thing the rebels did is organize a central bank, and that was, of course, immediately recognized by Euroclear and Federal Reserve, and all the money of Libya disappeared.
Now,
so in effect,
prior to that, go ahead.
Go ahead. In effect, the Zionists, the cabal bankers, stole $500-600 billion of Libya's money and blew the country up with its own money and kept all the difference. So it was a real strong positive event for them.
Okay, now you had mentioned the guy in Turkey, the Jewish mob, the Khazar mob. Okay, talk about that for a minute. Explain that, what his involvement was there.
Well, they moved into Libya about 150 years ago, and they claimed into Misrata, and that was the best port location for Libya. And they moved in there, and they claimed to convert to Islam, but they didn't. Underground, they had mosques and they had weapons manufacturing facilities. And as I said, this is how they took over by force, by mafia tactics, most of the commercial activities in Libya. There was only one container port in Libya, that was Misrata. They would not let any other port be built, so all the commerce flowed through that port in Misrata. The other ports in Libya were so small, the largest ships they could handle were 12,500 tons, which are little tiny ships. Nobody uses those anymore.
They just got caught in a Bernie Madoff type scheme.
Yeah.
They had stolen
$100 billion in phony paper. Misrata had sold the government $100 billion worth of phony paper, and that was done by a guy who's one of the brothers is in Houston, the other one was in England.
Turkish.
And they're Turkish mafia.
They had gotten caught, and they were fixing to lose all their assets. The government was going to take all their assets so of course they immediately joined NATO to have the country blown up.
And the deal with the banks, since Gaddafi didn't like the cabal, he was a big African Union guy, and he started the African Bank. It was housed in the Comore Islands. The currency was going to be gold backed, and it was going to be the gold backed dinar for the continent of Africa. Every African, I mean, every single Arab.
I'm sorry, I want you to explain that just a second, but I want to set the record straight. The original dinar money, which was the Iraq money prior to the U.S. invading Iraq in 2002, that money was found in warehouses. Pallets were brought back to the U.S., and then there was a new dinar money created, which you're talking about now. So
well, no, that was a different deal. Dinar is like a dollar. It's the name of a currency, but Iraq uses dinar, Kuwait uses the name dinar, Libya uses the name dinar, but the gold bag dinar was specific to the African bank. And that had nothing to do with Iraq. This had to do with a new banking system that the only currency was going to be gold backed, and every Arab country signed up as members, and half of Africa had signed up as members. And of course, the Zionist bankers couldn't have that because that would have made their toilet paper worth nothing. They would have been out of business overnight. So they want to have Gaddafi killed and blown up. The second thing that happened is the United States is bound and determined to have a war with China, and they want to keep the natural resources of Africa away from China. So the United States is busy forming AFRICOM, and that's military control of Africa. And Libya, South Africa, and half a dozen other countries, and Africa said, not ever. We're not going to turn over military control to anybody. So, of course, in order to get AFRICOM put in place, if they knocked over the strongest country in Africa at the time, which was Libya, then the rest of them would fall. So the United States was gung-ho to blow up Libya. The third thing is, and we found this out from intelligence from the CIA and their inside people, that Lockerbie was also a false flag operation, and Libya had really nothing to do with that. The CIA was running drugs out of Afghanistan and all over the world, and the report on those rogue CIA agents was 3 of the investigators were on that plane flying back with their report about the drug trafficking of the rogue CIA people. They were on that plane. The CIA told all the political people that were, if you remember holiday time, they told them not to take that flight. That's why all those college students who were on standby got on that flight. And it was blown up, and it was not done by Libya. It was done by the CIA. And Susan Lindauer was an inside source on that. And her boss, they both testified at World Court about Libya not having anything do with that, but Gaddafi and Libya agreed to pay all those penalties and everything in order to be allowed back into the world community so they could develop Libya. And so Lockerbie was the third condition. But the truth of the matter was, it was an absolute made up. There was no Arab Spring, never was. And on the DVD that we sell, the only way we're able to support ourselves is with our little DVD. But on that DVD, there's a long interview with Dennis Kucinich, where he tells, and he had the proof in hand, that the war games planning the attack on Libya were set into place years ahead, and they actually had the war games in 2010, this year before Arab Spring ever started, and the war games were going to have 11 ships roll into the Mediterranean, and they would start with a no-fly zone under the auspices of protecting the civilians, the innocents, and then they would use distance inside the country and ground forces if necessary and overthrow that government. And the planned date for that to take place was March 17th, 2011. It actually started a month earlier. So Libya, the destruction of Libya was planned way in advance. There was no Arab Spring. That was a rogue operation, again, by the criminal elements in our government. And
they had to bring in 250,000 Al-Qaeda mercenaries into Libya because there were no Libyans that were going to fight against their government. There were so few. Less than 10% Libyans would have ever fought.
Well, they had a good life.
They had a great life. And what happened is when they let these guys in, they had 16 police stations that were blown up exactly at the same time in 16 different cities in Libya.
This on the 18th of February, this spontaneous revolution, 16 police stations, I think it may have been 18, in cities all over Libya. A firebomb car was driven into the police station. Everybody killed there. They raided those, got their guns. Then next thing they went with tanks and knocked down, or bulldozers, knocked down walls where the tanks and everything were stored, drugged them out, got in them, fired them up, turned the cannons around, and started blowing up the military. They attacked the weapons stores.
They opened all the prisons up.
Yeah, and so this was a planned operation from day one. And of course, the Libyans were not a part of it. These were all mercenaries. These were Al Qaeda, Muslim Brotherhood, Ansar al-Sharia. These were the radical Islamists that were not really allowed in Libya.
They had been fighting against our soldiers in Afghanistan the week before they came to Libya, being supported by the CIA, by Blackwater, by whoever you want to say has supported them, arming them, training them, funding them. We have reports of those guys speaking to the media saying, yeah, well, we hate the USA, but now we find a 50% like them because they're supporting us over here in Libya. So we were shocked. We were trying to get the truth out the best we could and to try to help the Libyan people. And we were invited on an NGO fact-finding commission. It's an international NGO fact-finding commission to go to Libya and try to figure out what was going on, because they were members of the UN, and the UN has a regulation that before they start any action in a country, they're required to have 2 fact-finding commissions go there. Libya requested 3 times for a fact-finding commission to go to Libya, including the Pope was one of those, requested it too. The UN turned a blind eye, never sent a fact-finding commission there. So there were some international groups. Ours was a youth organization that organized themselves some fact-finding commissions, and we were asked to head it.
So we went in there in the first week of May, and we actually were trapped inside Tripoli over 100 days. And we went all over Libya. We told them we would go in there only if we could go any place we wanted to. We wanted to film what we wanted to. We wanted to determine if what we were hearing on the news was correct or not. And if we determined that Libya was in the wrong, then we were absolutely going to put that out. And so as I said, we traveled all over Libya. We interviewed people. We went into hospitals. We talked with the bishop, the prelate of the Catholic Church. He said that the incidence of death that nobody talked about at all was one day in a hospital in Tripoli, there were 50 miscarriages and over 40 civilians, men, women, and children, came in there with bomb-related injuries. None of that was being reported. And the estimate of the number of innocents that were killed in the first month of the bombings was about 100,000. Well, we're hearing from NATO 6,000. So the truth just wasn't there. And we had the audacity to go on the news there and tell the Libyans they had the right to determine their own government, and that no matter what Al Qaeda and Muslim Brotherhood were telling them, that Libya was a pretty good place to begin with. Well, we were so, naive, innocent, whatever. We thought that for sure if the good God-fearing people in the government of the United States found out how wrong-footed we were in Libya, that they would stop it. And the only 2 people in the government while we were there during this fact-finding mission, Dennis Kucinich and Ron Paul, were the only 2 that were trying to defund and stop the war in Libya. Everybody else gung-ho for it.
It was an attack on Libya. We were shocked what we saw when we got there. We saw homes blown up, pieces of babies, pieces of horrible things. You can't imagine what we saw.
Hospitals were attacked. We were in a hospital and they bombed it. 300 feet from where we were bombed.
They blew up schools. They blew up power plants. They blew up homes. They blew up hotels.
Water treatment plants.
They blew up date palm orchards. They blew up farms. They blew up wheat farms. They blew up the Great Man-Made River, which was just a water supply. They flew every night and bombed every night. After the no-fly zone was in place, there was nobody fighting anybody, but they continued to attack that country.
According to our pilots, 2.5 days after the no-fly zone was started, it was fixed in place, and their statement was Libya could not get a mosquito in the air. So why did the bombing continue? 60,000 bombing sorties, more bombing sorties than World War II combined. Libya was bombed literally to oblivion. And not only were they bombed, but depleted uranium weapons were used, fuel air explosives were used in several of the cities that just would not give up. That's a poor man's nuclear device. And we saw the destruction of the civilians. And, of course, the military targets were easy to hit, but that's not who they were hitting. They started bombing every night in the cities, beginning at about 2 o'clock in the morning and going until 6:30 or 7 in the morning. So it was a psychological attack on the people of Libya.
We interviewed so many people that came to tell us their story about how they had these horrible things happen to them, the atrocities, the rape of all these young girls, the slicing and dicing of people and putting them in refrigerators so their family came home and found them in there. Horrible things. You can't even imagine how anybody even thought of these things. It was just beyond me. But also they embargoed the city of Tripoli because Tripoli was the largest city in Libya and was for their government. They didn't want this war, so they began to embargo it. And it's just full of civilians. They embargoed gasoline, food, water, medicine. There were 5-mile-long lines just for gasoline in the city.
All the military vehicles were diesel. The civilian vehicles were gasoline. So stopping the supply of gasoline directly affected the civilians. And I'm going to tell you something else about that. The Libyan women, the young girls, were being raped from day one. And they would feed these young guys Viagra and booze. They never had any alcohol. They would go snatch young girls off the street, take them to the mosques and violate them, put them in rape houses. And Hillary Clinton was telling the world that the protection of the civilians wasn't working. We were going to have to put Marines on the ground in Libya. And the truth was the rape was being done by the U.S. paid mercenaries against the Libyan people. It wasn't the other way around. The Libyan men were not. The soldiers were not raping women. It was the other way around. And we have, 250,000 documents of testimony about that.
Now you got
and,
one of 250,000 mercenaries that were sent in there, Blackwater and all the other type, these hired mercenaries.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and these are the ones doing it. And Hillary Clinton was sitting there. She was complicit in this whole thing, wasn't she?
Oh, absolutely. And she was trying to get troops on the ground because, of course, the war in Libya was promised to take 2 weeks. That's what the experts said. They were everybody in Libya was going to join hands with the mercenaries and they'd knock over Libya in 2 weeks. Let me tell you what, people were happy. They didn't want the war. And one of the Turkish companies we were doing business with that was building our facilities, our infield facilities, if you would, the housing and portable housing and things like that. The brother of one of these executives was an aide to Erdogan's ambassador. Erdogan is the head of Turkey, and they were at a G7 or G8 meeting in France. And this is while all this is going on, and they're talking about the destruction of Libya and how it's taking so long, and all these people are being killed. And Hillary Clinton was in that meeting, and when this Turkish ambassador asked him about all the death and destruction of the civilians, she looked over at him and kind of smirked. She said, "You have to bust a few eggs to make an omelet." And it so shocked this Turkish man that he told us, he said, you all have a terrible attitude about the value of human life.
Well, in
now,
Libya,
while we're on Hillary Clinton, I'm going to tell you what else happened. While we were there, the hotels and everything, there were very few of them operating. And the ambassador for South Africa, the plenipotentiary ambassador, in other words, the man had the ability to sign and bind the country with his signature. And his name was H.E. Dangor. And first time we met him, we asked him, why in the world did South Africa join hands in this attack on Libya? Because Libya and South Africa had always worked together very, very well and everything. And he said, your ambassador, Hillary Clinton, came into our leaders and said, you either join us in this attack on Libya or you'll have rebels in your own backyard. He said it was like the woman had a closet full of rebels she could drop any place. And I know that's what she said because before that, right when this war first started, the Libyans had no rescue equipment at all. They didn't have any jaws of life. And when these buildings were being blown up, they're all wet wall construction, and a wall would fall over and there'd be women and children, everybody trapped inside. And they were out there with heavy ropes and cables and bulldozers trying to lift these walls off of these people so they could get them out. And of course that never worked. The wall always collapsed and people were dying.
So I went to our close friends who are members of the royal family in Kuwait, and I said, why don't you all make a donation of $10 million of Jaws of Life equipment to Libya? And I said, I've sourced some in Germany, a lot of it in the United States. And I said, you can send that in there and it will save a bunch of lives. It'll really help the Libyan people. So they said they would consider it. And 3 days later, I called them back and I said, well, what about the donation? They said, well, instead of 10 million, we've agreed to put 50 million in. And I said, great. Are you all going to source the equipment? Can we help you do that? And they said, well, no, actually, we contacted the Secretary of State's office to find out how we should do that. And they said, well, if you're interested in getting involved in Libya, then you need to send that $50 million to Qatar, who's handling all that charitable stuff. And since you're so interested in Libya, you better join hands with us, or you might have an uprising in Kuwait also. So their $50 million went to funnel the Qatar criminals, who are the junkyard dogs for the rogue CIA and our criminal government.
So Hillary
we know that Hillary
was complicit. She was complicit in everything. Here she was running around threatening other countries as the U.S. Secretary of State.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Absolutely.
You know, you know that their mantra, you know, the cabal mantra is, you know, there's, you know, acceptable collateral damage. That's what, it doesn't matter how many people die to get the agenda done. That's acceptable collateral damage. That's their favorite term. I want to tell you that one of the buildings they blew up in Libya was the Children's Center. And it was an ancient building. It was actually one of those on the UNICEF building. Yeah. Libya had one of the highest records, if not the highest record, for child survival and child health in the world. Their records were all in that building. We knew the lady who ran it. That building also held rehab centers for crippled children, for adults that were brain damaged and things like. It had a lot of humanitarian things it did. There was a UN inspector there one day, and 30 minutes after he left, 30 minutes after he left, it was right down the street from our hotel, that building was hit with a direct strike. And completely blown up. If Miss Naima had not left, she would have been dead. Yeah. She was the lady.
So all the records of the health care, the quality health care that Libya had provided to its people, was blown up. And we saw that all the time. All the news people that were in Libya were actually CIA or other intelligence agencies. And when they went around to inspect any military facility, they would call in strikes. And so Libya stopped taking them around military facilities, made them all stay in one hotel where they could watch them.
A lot of them carried big knives on their sides, wore flak jackets. You know, you could tell they weren't just regular. I mean, they admitted who they were. It didn't matter. But I want to say that there are over 128 mass graves in Libya. There are over 600,000 killed. There's 2 million in exile at this point. The thing that happened in Libya too is there's a large population of black Libyans, who came there a couple hundred years ago during the slave trade, but they are first-class citizens in Libya. They have a number of cities there. They provide a lot of agriculture. Well, the Ansar al-Sharia, the Al-Qaeda, put out a message that they would see to it that they would cleanse Libya of all blacks. And this came out in the news while we were there. We were shocked. They have gone in and razed either three or four cities. Black cities have been completely razed. And those people were all killed. They aren't killed like if you're a regular Arab, they shoot you in the head. If you're black, they chop you up and burn you. And it's a criminal behavior that is unbelievable, the atrocities that happened there from these people.
On our DVD, there's one section of it's real hard to watch, but it shows this one Libyan young man, first day of the fighting, and he actually had his head chopped off. And his mother, we interviewed his mother and father, and they didn't realize what had happened to him until they were watching the news, and Al Jazeera and Al Arabiya were saying that he was a rebel and that this was done by Gaddafi's army. He was actually in the military. And she didn't realize it was her son until she saw the specific striped shirt that he had. We have other videos of black soldiers on their hands and knees, hands wired together with wire, crawling on the ground, and they're forcing them to eat pieces of a cadaver. They were being starved to death and then fed cadaver of one of their comrades. And that's on our DVD. It's a real hard look, but Joann and I either videoed those ourselves or we interviewed the families of the people that this happened to.
Okay,
these are real hard things for us to see.
Jim, give out your website and where people can get the DVD.
Our website is LibyanWarTheTruth.com. LIBYAN warthetruth.com. It's www.libyanwarthetruth.com. And that DVD you can purchase there.
That's how we're able to survive. We've been blacklisted and soft-killed by our own government.
Well, what happened to us is we got stuck in Tripoli because the road, you couldn't fly out. The only people who were allowed to fly were the rebels who were flying all around Libya out of Benghazi. Or they weren't really rebels, the mercenaries, I should say, a lot from Qatar and some other places. Well, the road to Tripoli the road to Tunisia from Tripoli was being bombed. It was bombed in just at any time. You didn't know when it was going to happen, so you couldn't get a car to go out. The tribes we got very close to the Libyan tribes during this time. We went to a lot of their meetings, and the head of the tribes, we met with him over at one of the hotels right before NATO came in and blew up Tripoli. They had finished their constitution. They had a new constitution that all the tribes were 100% in agreement with. All the Libyans would have all democracy rights, even though they had them already. They had a new one. That was to appease the UN and everybody to stop the bombing. 3 days after that constitution was written, NATO came into Tripoli and blew it up. They came in with those black helicopters off the ocean with their guns blazing, or those cannons on them blazing. We know because we were right there.
We're on the 21st floor of the Corinthia Hotel looking out towards the Mediterranean. And late in the afternoon, we heard the noise, looked out our window. We could see two of the black Apache type helicopters coming in low with their mini cannons blazing. We could hear the third one back farther to the west, and they flew in low into Tripoli, and they were mowing down every man, woman, and child in the street.
They killed 1,300 people in an hour. And they
wounded
wounded 5,000.
Killed 1,300.
Then they just started
in the
bombing.
Hour.
They started bringing in big shiploads of Al-Qaeda mercenaries. You see them in those little trucks all the time with their black flags and their beards.
Anti-aircraft guns in the back.
They just started offloading hundreds of them.
And we're watching them because we're right at the port, and we're watching the port offload these things, and they're flowing into nonstop like ants, flowing into Tripoli.
A man was killed underneath, right outside our window on the ocean. He was chopped up there in front of us. It was right outside our window.
We filmed that. They
tried to shoot Jimmy. They missed him.
I've been filming them for about 2 hours while they cut off his head, both arms, one leg, and I guess their machete got dull because they couldn't hack off his last leg. And I'm filming all this, and then somebody evidently saw me. I'm like I said, 21 floors up, and they took a shot at me. Would have been a 350-yard shot, and the bullet came right by my ear. The second pane of glass stopped it. But the next morning there were 38 heads lined up above that man's. They just left him out there on the beach.
They basically gave Tripoli to Al-Qaeda. I mean, they broke into every house. They broke into every car. They went into the shops. They raped women. They did whatever they wanted. They absolutely killed all the living soldiers they caught, execution style. They put them on their knees, tied their hands behind their head, and just shot them in the head. We were so shocked, and we were already shocked from the 3 months we were there. But at this point, we were trying to figure out how we could get out, because it was getting worse. Everything in Tripoli was taken over by Al-Qaeda. Our hotel was the only one left with any food. And they brought all those people from the Rixos, all those reporters over to our hotel. And we met the German FIFA coach in the lobby. His name was Anton Hay. He was the FIFA coach for Libya. And he asked us if we were going to get out. We said we were going to try. And he asked if he could go with us. We also were joined by the sister of the president of Mauritania, Fatima II, and we were also joined by a Bahraini prince. At that time,
and one ne'er-do-well from Texas that was over there trying to sell guns. But
the Russian ambassador had met us, maybe some weeks before that. And he called us over at the hotel and he said, I know your country's not doing anything to help you, but the Prime Minister of Malta has sent a rescue ship for all the dignitaries that are here. He said, can I put your name on the list? And we said, yes, please. And we asked him to put the other people's name on too. So we knew we're going to have a shot to get out of there. We just didn't know how we were going to get to the ship.
So the hotel loaned us their little van and gave us a driver and a man to ride shotgun. And the 7 of us loaded into that little van. And we started trying to get to the port to get to this rescue ship. And you couldn't get to the port. So we were talking by ship-to-shore phone, satellite phone, to the assistant to the minister in Malta, and she was directing us to go east on the coast highway, and we went as far east as 42 kilometers.
And if you can envision, every 100 feet there was a checkpoint of these guys with the beards with their AK-47s firing them off in the air, trying to see who was in there, trying to see if they could take anything or steal anything.
The hotel people were telling them that we were reporters. And since the reporters had been lying and protecting them forever, they were real happy about that. And they'd shoot off their gun. One idiot shot at the ground very near the van, and the bullet ricocheted up and knocked out the back window in the van. But these guys, you gotta understand, they were hyped up on drugs and alcohol all the time. And they would shoot anything that moved. And so here we were, 42 kilometers back and forth on this coast highway looking for the rescue ship. And every 100 meters or so getting stopped. And this went on all day. And one time we were she was telling us at this little fishing village, which was this far 42 kilometers out. We went up there and stopped one of the leaders that pulled up in a better looking vehicle. And we spoke to him and he said, oh, well, we'll help you. And so they took us into their town. And we kept getting on smaller and smaller streets and finally into an alleyway that was just wide enough for the vehicle to get through there. And they were taking us to a mosque. And all these people were at the mosque. Now, I want you to understand all the nasty things that took place were done in the mosques. All the rapes, all the torture, they weapons, chopped up men and cooked them, boiled them in oil and everything else. All that took place in the mosques. So here we are, taken to a mosque, and thank goodness those people were good folks. They weren't bad guys. And they said, oh, yeah, the little fishing village is down here. We'll have one of our people take you down there. So we went down. They went with us, and we went to this little fishing village. And we didn't know it at the time, but we were about 100 yards away from these 2 tugboats that were sitting there without any lights on or anything. And they were going to smuggle us out to the ship because the ship had been fired on, the rescue ship, and it was moored 3 miles out. Al-Qaeda and Muslim Brotherhood, Ansar al-Sharia would not let it come in to rescue all of us. And so it was 3 miles out. They'd sent in 2 tugboats, and those tugboats were there. We could have thrown a rock and hit them, but we didn't know it. And so we went back into we said, this gal must be mistaken. We went back into the main port of Tripoli. We were held inside the port for about an hour, and all of a sudden, here comes 20 or 30 or 40 of these little trucks, every one of them with 4 or 5 armed, bearded Al-Qaeda types. They surrounded us, put their AK-47s right in our face. And the big tall guy that was their leader, older guy, hard-looking character, he said, well, your game is up. We know who you are. And then they took us to their torture center. We were taken in there. We were held in the lobby of their torture center. They had taken over the Radisson Hotel. Yeah, they were taking wounded soldiers up. Now, there's no lights or electricity or anything except the emergency electricity for the elevators. And they would drag these wounded soldiers in, take them up to the mezzanine. And Joann and I and the other of our group heard sounds coming out of human beings that no one ever wants to ever hear. They were up there torturing these poor guys to death. And we were there a long time. And I kept demanding that they give us our passports back and let us out of there. And finally, after a long, long time, day and a half or so later, they took us into the coffee shop, and they had a British film crew there that filmed each one of us individually. And they asked us, have you been treated well? Have you been injured? Are you hurt? And, of course, we said no.
the reason for that is that they had set up a kill zone 2 blocks away, and they were going to blame our death on Gaddafi, and they were going to say that they had video proof that we were all in good shape when we left them. But when they gave us our passports back after that, they had taken our computers. They had
all of our money, everything. They took everything.
Well, no, the money came from a different thing. Then we were ready to leave, and I kept demanding that we were going to go to the rescue ship. We thought we knew where it was then. And then the driver from the hotel changed. And the guy that came over and said he was the new driver was the head of the IT at the Corinthia. And he spoke perfect English, very well educated guy. We knew him, but he was never very friendly. And he came over and he said, well, I'm taking the van back to the Corinthia. And I said, like hell, we're going to the rescue ship. And he took Joann over to the side. And he said, you know, what your husband didn't understand is that when the imam came in, there's this big, tall, bald-headed, bearded, fat so-and-so that came in. He looked down his nose at us.
What he said to me was, he said, your husband is angry. I don't blame him. He said, but you two are really good people. I know that you were just here to help the Libyan people. And what he didn't understand and what you didn't understand was that big, tall imam over there with the big, long white beard. What he said, when they leave and go to the rescue ship, there's a kill zone 2 blocks away. They're to be killed, chopped up, and burned. And it'll be blamed on Gaddafi. He said, so this van's not going that way. This van's going back to the other hotel, the other direction. And I said, well, we need to tell my husband this. And I mean, it's like a surreal time in my memory, you know, because, it was such a strange thing for somebody to tell you, if you go there, you're going to be killed, chopped up, and burned.
He was the Al-Qaeda insider at that hotel. And when he told me that, he said, I know you're good people. And he said, these men down at the kill zone are going to be paid $2,500 a piece to kill you, and then another $1,000 each to chop you up and burn you. And there were 7 of us. And he said, they'll have to be paid. Of our group of 7, I'm the only one had any money. I had $16,800 left. And I gave him the money. He went down and negotiated our escape, if you would. And then he drove the back roads from the Radisson Hotel back to the Corinthia. So we slipped that noose that night. That was our first miracle, because no Al-Qaeda person ever does anything against Al-Qaeda. If you look wrong, they'll kill you and chop you up. And so this man, by coming over there to make the effort to save us, was the first miracle. God touched his heart. And so we're now back at the hotel we started at 2 days earlier, you know.
Let's stop.
And I'm now out of money.
God touched his heart. You believe in God, and that's the only reason you two are alive, right?
Oh, absolutely.
That's 100%
Absolutely.
correct.
There was 2 more miracles he delivered to us to get us out of Libya, because we were on their kill list. This big, tall guy that came down to the port, he had a sheet of paper with our names on it. We were on their kill list. And so we got back to our hotel, and Fatima too, who's the sister of the president of Mauritania, she said, you know, I know one of these guys that's on the UN rescue ship that's taking these immigration refugees back to Benghazi, the Filipinos and other ones that need to get out of Tripoli. And she says, I think I can get us on that ship. And I said, she spoke Spanish, I do too. And I said, but you know, that's the head of the snake. Why don't we want to go there? And she said, no, I've talked to friends over there, and there's nobody in Benghazi. All the murders from Benghazi are over here killing people in Tripoli. And I said, what do we do after we get there? And she said, I don't know, but we'll have to work it out. So Joann and I prayed about it, and the man came, so we talked to him, and he said, yes, I know you. He said, I've known you for a long time. He said, I'm going to help you get on that ship. I'm going to take you in my own van. I'm going to get you through all the checkpoints, and I'm going to make an arrangement when you arrive in Benghazi that you're taken to the Tbilisi hotel rather than to the camps, the refugee camps on the border, because they will know who you are. And so he said, I'm going to get you to Benghazi, and there's a U.S. office there. And he said, I'll do that. So he was good to his word. He got us on that ship, and we had 2 days of hell on the Mediterranean, no food, no water, spoiled fruit juice that you did the green apple quick step if you ate that, moldy bread. But 2 days later, we got into Benghazi and were taken to the Tbilisi hotel and not to the refugee centers on the Egypt border. So that was the second miracle. And the third miracle was getting us out of Benghazi.
in one piece. And that happened with the top guy left for the National Transitional Council, who was the phony government of the United States installed in Libya. The number 3 man was in Benghazi, and when we went to the Tabisi Hotel, we tried to get the U.S. office there to help us. And we went to that office, and the guy barely spoke in English. He said, "I'm not here to help any Americans. I'm here to help the rebels." He said, "I can't help you." So we went downstairs to the European Union. That guy was real nice. He said, "Well, we can't help you because you're not European Union." So when we got back down to the lobby, the concierge at the hotel noticed that we were not typical of the bearded rebels that came in. So he called the number 3 man in the NTC, and that man came in. And I'll tell you the rest of that story after your break at the top of the hour, because it's really interesting too. That's okay. The third miracle.
James, let's go to the top of the hour here, folks. We are at the top of the hour. We're going to take coffee, listen to a song, and we'll be right back with my 2 special guests, James and Joann Moriarty. And their website is www.libyawarthetruth.com, correct? Libya War?
Libyan.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is Stew Webb on the Veterans Truth Network.com, and it is June the 15th, 2015. And my special guests in the second hour, once again, is James and Joann Moriarty. Pronounce your last name for me.
Moriarty.
Sorry. Yeah. And their website is LibyaWarTheTruth.com. And they got a CD of all these atrocities. You got to get the CD. You got to look at the CD, folks. This is the way it supports them. And we're going to be talking more about what you got on CD. But I'm going to let you two pick it up. I mean, I don't want to even ask questions. I just want to listen to you.
Okay. Well, after we got to Benghazi, as I said, we tried through the U.S. office there and through the European Union. And then the hotel called in the head of the NTC to come to the hotel, because they said, "These are not normal people, you know. You need to come over here and help them." And so he sent his security man over, who, of course, didn't speak any English, but he spoke to the prince and spoke to Fatima too. And then he told his boss he needed to come over there. And so the man came over, well-dressed, perfect English, well-educated guy. And in those tribal cultures, it's real important if you know their tribe or somebody in their tribe. And he told us where he was from. And so we had some real close friends in his tribe. And so I related that to him. He got a smile on his face, and he said, "Okay." He said, "How long has it been since y'all have eaten?" We said, 5 days. And he said, "Well, this is still Ramadan." He said, "But the hotel will have a real nice buffet at breakfast." And he said, "I'm going to invite you to eat." And he said, "I can't be with you. I need to be with my family." But he said, "Then I'm going to leave my security man here with you, and we're going to see if we can't get you on an airplane that's taking wounded soldiers out of Benghazi to Tunisia." And he said, "I'm going to see if we can't get you on that flight and get you out of Libya." And so he left his security man there. They took us to they fed us, of course. That was a great deal. Then they took us to the airport, and he put us at the head of the line, got us first boarding passes and everything, then took us to the executive lounge at the airport. And we were there for I don't know how many hours waiting. The flight was supposed to leave at 10:30. It finally left at 6:30, or pardon me, 2:30 in the morning. But he took us into the executive lounge and had everybody. We were out of sight and out of mind of everybody, because everybody wanted to get on that flight. And there were more people wanting to go than there were seats.
They said they were taking wounded soldiers to Tunisia, because this was still a no-fly zone.
Now, that was not true, because the people were on the flight was only about half full when it finally took off, and lots of politicians, members of the NTC. We had opportunity to talk with them at length in the lounge there, but late, early in the morning, complete darkness. They walked us out the airplane. We got on the plane.
Just walked out on the tarmac and got on the plane. There were no lights. There was I don't even know if there was a tower running then. It was just black.
This was the most raggedy-ass old 727 you've ever seen. Most of the doors were missing off the overhead compartments. When you looked down between your feet, you could see daylight, And when the plane took off, it was everything you could do to get in the air. And then it rattled and rocked and rolled and everything. And the pilot came on and told us he wouldn't turn on the lights because the Libyans might try to shoot us out of the sky. And we went ahead and landed in Tunisia, a couple hours later. And
4:30 in the
When
morning.
we offloaded, there were half a dozen or so guys from Qatar on the plane with us. And the Bahraini prince, he said, I can tell by their accent that they're military, and he said they're middle military, majors and folks like that.
He said they were from Qatar. He said
Qatar, yeah.
That by their accent.
And he said they're going home. And so we're in the luggage area, of course, and they've got these two metal frames. They're about they're 18 inches by 14 inches with big metal casters on them. They've got those on the plane with them. They set them down by the conveyor belts, and out comes the conveyor belt, this reinforced metal box. And it took 4 of them to lift it off and put it on this dolly. And then the second one that came down, when they went to lift it off, it had a hole in the side of it. And they tipped it, and some little gold buttons fell out. Well, what that was, they had melted down some of the gold bars of Libya to get rid of the hallmark, and they poured them into little Coppola cups, and so they shoved those back into that box, put it on there, and rolled it out of there. Well, we knew that those 6 or 8 guys were taking their spoils home with them, part of the Libyan gold that they'd stolen. But we had no money at that time. Nobody with us had any money, and Fatima too had a friend in Tunisia that helped us get into the hotel that night, and we called the U.S. couldn't get anybody in the embassy in Tunisia, of course, and so we got through via the internet to the State Department in Washington D.C. And the guy said, "Well, there's nothing we can do on the weekend. It's the end of August. It's bankers' holiday in Europe. The flights are all booked." And I said, "Well, we need to get out of here. We've got to get back." And he said, "Well, they could put us up in a hotel in the resort part of Tunisia, which was a $70 cab ride away from where we were. We were $3 cab ride from the airport." And he said, "Well, that's the best I can do. And if you don't have any money," he said, "you can have some of your family members send money to us, and then we'll dole it out to you." And I said, "Well, we don't need anybody to do that. If they're going to send money, they can send it to us." And he said, "Well, if they won't send you any money, then you can forfeit your passports. We will loan you the money, give you a one-way ride back to the United States, and then when you repay all the money on us, then we'll issue you new passports." So we had Joanne's daughter got us some flights the next morning into Rome. Actually, we had plenty of miles to use our miles to buy seats and everything, and we had a lot of trouble at the airport until they heard who we were and what our story was, and then the British Airways folks were so nice to us. They absolutely helped us. They got us on a flight that day into London, put us in a nice hotel in London, gave us tickets for meals and everything. And then we arrived back in Houston. It would have been 2 days later, And when we arrived at the airport, Joanne had secreted on her person a hard drive with all this.
An external hard drive.
Yeah, hundreds of gigabytes of our proof of what went on.
All our interviews, all our paperwork, all our everything was on it.
And so she went through, and they let her go on through.
It didn't bother me.
They snagged me, and I had my rolling bag with me. They took me into a little.
The FBI took it.
Yeah, took me into a little area, and I was grilled for 3 hours. The man that was grilling me had 3 screens. I couldn't see the front of the screens. I could only see the back, but he was receiving questions from different entities, and he would ask me the question. I'd respond. He'd type my answer, and then they'd ask more questions. They're really interested in finding out who paid our way. That was us. Who did we work for? That was us. What were we doing there? We were head of an NGO fact-finding commission. Why did we go to Libya in the first place? All these questions. 3 hours. And finally, and they took my suitcase apart, took the lining out of it. They were looking.
Jim, I think we just lost you. Folks, we're going to have to call him back. Jim, we have no mic. We did. We lost him, folks. We'll have him back in just a minute. Okay, buddy. Let's see if we can get him back here. We're losing him. We're going to have to get him back on. Gene Chip Tatum, you want to pick it up for a second while I get him on?
Hello.
We got him back.
We're on the phone. They killed our internet. This happens to us quite often, you know, when we're on the radio. Joanne says we're back, so she's going to try to hook up again with you.
Just stay on this line with us if you can.
I'll do that. I'm going to stay on it. It's a separate deal altogether.
I'll let you pick up. Gene's co-interviewing here for a minute. Go ahead.
Okay.
Jim.
So, anyhow, Joanne said she's back on if you want to call her back. But
I will do that now.
Call her back on Skype. Yeah, and I'll continue to talk here. Here we go. Now then. There you go.
Okay, let's pick it back up on Skype then.
Okay, there we are. That's better. Sorry about that.
Hey,
They do that to us every now and then.
So why don't you pick up where you left off? Pick up about where you left off.
I was being interrogated by the FBI, and
I said the information wasn't touched on me because Al Qaeda will not touch a woman unless it's to kill her or rape her, and so they didn't touch me. So all the information was on me. It wasn't. We didn't do it intentionally that way. It just worked out that way. It worked out great because it came out with me.
Joanne, are you still there? Oh, they got cut again, folks. They got cut again. We're going to have to wait. Gene, are you there? Pick up just for a moment here while I make sure we get them back on. We're going to have to.
Hello.
Okay, Gene, we have Jim and Joanne back on. And
yeah, well, you've got me back on. I'm on the cell phone. We're playing with our internet.
Yeah, I'm trying your wife here on the internet, and I'm not getting her. It's I'm dragging her in, and it's not happening. So let's stay on the cell phone. Okay.
Well, no, they killed it on our end. We can see that the internet signal is killed coming into our place here.
Oh, they're doing to you what they've done to me a long time ago.
Oh, sure.
I started learning how to play the game back, and we talked about it earlier. So.
Well, as Joanne was saying, the only time that they would have touched her person is if they're going to rape, kill her. So she was able to secret out all the information that we had that came out of Libya. And then, of course, when we got back into Houston, we started contacting everybody in earnest at that time to try to let them know just how wrong-footed our government was there. And, of course, nobody talked to us. Finally, a year or so later, Tara Dahl, who was Michelle Bachmann's aide, started responding to Joe, and she said, well, y'all need to be debriefed, and we need to get the intelligence agencies out there. And so within a few days, the top interrogator for the Defense Intelligence Agency was in our home in Houston, in the Woodlands. And he was actually in our home probably a dozen times, and we provided them with all the intelligence that we were getting from the tribes of Libya. We got real close to the tribes while we were there, and they actually made us their official spokesperson, and we were adopted by one of the tribes, because we were the first foreigners ever to be adopted by a Libyan tribe, and that's because they knew that we were not working against them. And we were providing the U.S., through the Defense Intelligence Agency, the locations of the leaders of Al-Qaeda and Muslim Brotherhood, where they spent the night. We were giving them latitude and longitude. We were giving them the locations of the underground weapons stores that they had in Libya, the locations of their training centers. All this was actionable intelligence, according to them. But they weren't doing anything about it. And the coup d'etat was when we gave them the location of the huge training center near Derna that had been established, and they had, I don't know if it was 14,000 for rotating through there all the time, being out to be terrorists, and they had never given that location to anybody. The tribes gave it to us. We gave it directly to the Defense Intelligence Agency. 4 days later, they got an emergency evacuation alert, and they were told to leave that camp, take only the weapons they could carry with them, sell the extra weapons locally. And then we had one of the generals that was a Libyan tribal guy embedded with them, acting as an underling, followed them all the way through the Libya, everything out through Algeria, and we were giving the U.S. intelligence the description of the vehicles, where they were, exactly who was there, etc. And of course, nothing was ever done. And I told the Defense Intelligence Agency, I said, if all this information we're giving you is not only not being used for any proper purposes, and you're passing this intel on to these bad guys, then we're not going to give anything else. And so the Intelligence Agency stopped, and this guy brought in the FBI, and he said the FBI guy he was bringing with him could do wet work in Libya. Now, we give their names in our DVD, and I'll give you this guy's names too. He came in and gave us a phony name. That really hacked me off. His real name is Eric Maddox, and they've done a movie about him called Black Mission, and he's supposedly the top interrogator in the intelligence agency system in the United States. And he came in our home, lied to us, and gave us a phony name. Really, really aggravated me. But when we told him we weren't...
Do you have a picture of him on your DVD?
Sure, absolutely. Got his name up there. You can go on.
I want to see that, because I had these two goons one time in 1991 come to me and asked me if I was going to testify before some of those hearings I was causing. They said they were from Washington, the FBI, and these two goons, I could tell they weren't FBI. There was something wrong, and I tried to get them back to my front door after letting them sit down at the table. I tried to do everything I could. They didn't want to leave. Finally, I kept saying, hey, I got to go back to work. You guys are going to have to leave. Well, you're going to testify? I said, no, I'm not going to testify. I don't want to die. And finally, they left. Yeah. And then when they arrested me falsely about, a year later, and held me as political prisoner, who shows up in El Reno, Oklahoma? Why, they're transferring me from Houston down up to Denver, Colorado. These two goons. I said, Jesus.
Yeah, exactly.
But I'd like to find out their real names. So I'm always comparing faces of these fake FBI snitches.
We got his name, and that's an interesting story, but we'll cover that when we have more time. But Eric Maddox was his name, and then he brought in an FBI guy, and that guy was nothing. We burned him down in 2 meetings. He couldn't do anything. Then the next one they brought in was Glenn Beck and the Blaze. They were going to do a 2-hour documentary on us. And that was the introduction from Tara Dahl. And when we were talking to the Blaze, they said they're bringing a woman with them to set up security for us, and her name was Nikki Barakal. She turned out to be CIA, and she said that we were in more danger from this government than we were when we were in Al-Qaeda. And she was going to set up all these protocols to protect us. And when they're supposed to come back for their film crew, she called and said she canceled the operation because it was her decision, and we were talking to the intelligence agencies, and we needed to continue to do that. And I told her I didn't think that was going to happen, and I said, that sounds like a threat. She said, you stand down and do exactly what I'm telling you, or you won't have a life. You won't have a life. Now, this is a woman that verified to us that we had been targeted, soft-killed, and blacklisted when we arrived at the airport in Houston when we came back from Libya.
Now, this is Glenn Beck. Now, this is out of Glenn Beck. And here, Glenn Beck, we both know that he's working for the Israelis, Fox News, sure. The Israelis.
Sure.
And then go ahead, but Michelle Bachmann fits in here. Bitch Bachmann out of Minnesota, the former congresswoman.
Oh, yeah.
Tell them about
well, see,
that.
The first time they threatened to kill us was that time. And Joann and I at that time, we said, we're going to have to start going public. And that was 2 years ago, May. And we did. We started going public. We're going on the radio, doing seminars all the way from Houston all the way to Northern California and back. And then they threatened us through the Libyan tribes. They told the Libyan tribes, they said, you better get your friends in the United States to shut up, or else Al-Qaeda has their address in the woodlands, and they'll be at their front door. And we said, well, who did that then? Well, it was somebody from the U.S. didn't identify himself, but they were giving friendly advice. Then another time they threatened to kill us was when they finally looked at our DVD and we had all their names in it.
And 9 months after we put out our DVD, they contacted us. They said, we had a big meeting, all the intelligence agencies, and you all are some of the worst of the worst because you put our names out, and you put out Michelle Bachmann's name and Tara Dahl and Tim Hunt and all these other people, and now we're having to sleep with guns by our pillow. And Joann said, well, you hired on to do that. We didn't. And nobody told us we couldn't put out any names. You know, we thought we're all working against the same enemy, and you know, the Al-Qaeda, et cetera. So they had told us that by putting Michelle Bachmann's name out, that was a no-no. Tells you who she is and what her interests are. And, of course, oh, yeah. And then, you know, we've given seminars to the John Birch Society all over Texas, and we did one in Houston. And that day was Jim Drury's 80th birthday. He's a good friend of ours. He lives down in the Houston area. And after the luncheon meeting for the John Birch Society, we went to have dinner with him, but we had several hours to kill, so I had the oil changed and tires rotated on our car. And the man that did it had tattoos on the back of his hands all the way up both arms. And, of course, he had the car for an hour and a half or more at Walmart. And so that night when we're driving back to East Texas, the Texas Highway Patrol was following us with their radar guns going from the time we pulled out of Lake Conroe on Highway 105, and the two cars were behind us, and then they pull off, and two more cars would pull on, and the radar detectors going off the whole time. Joann said, do you think they put the radar gun on our rear bumper? And finally, about 70 miles out, which was around Livingston, Texas, they flipped on their red light. We pulled over, and the guy said, I want to look in your car. And I said, I don't guess so. And he said, well, you step out of the car. I'm bringing the drug dog here. And if we find any drugs, you're going to be arrested, and we're going to throw you in jail. And so Joann said we're back on Skype again, but I'm going to continue to talk to you. And so they put us on the other side of the bar, separated us.
Have your wife, Joann, join us on Skype where we were talking all together, and you stay right where you're at in case we lose her. Okay. Good.
And so the two guys were 25 patrollers. One of them had in his ear, kind of phone in his ear the whole time, and he kept talking to somebody. After about an hour, I asked Joann to see if she could understand what he was saying, and she got down close, and I came back up, and she said, he's saying that I'm there. That's where I'm looking. So the drug dog never found any drugs.
They didn't find any drugs.
No, they never found any drugs. No, because the guy at Walmart.
Hold up.
The guy at Walmart had gotten them.
Jim, ask your wife to mute the Skype. We're getting echo. Just mute the Skype, and when she wants to join in, unmute. Okay?
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
There we go. So anyhow, I'm sure the guy at Walmart, when he was changing the tires, found something up underneath the frame, because at the left rear corner of our Sequoia, those two highway patrollers were under that car 40 times each. Their uniforms were black from crawling up underneath that car. They were looking in the left rear corner, inside, underneath, and what he said on his phone was, I'm there. That's where I'm looking. So somebody was directing him to where the drugs had been planted. And of course, they weren't there because, again, God had helped us out and let the people who had tattoos all over his hands take those drugs home with him.
Stu?
I'm hearing you. Go ahead, Joann.
I wanted to give a little more information on the guys who came into our house. Eric Maddox was real fascinated that we were able to get into the tribes of Libya. He said, in all the military and all the stuff he's done, they've never been able to get involved in the tribes. And so they had a lot of questions for us. They said, my handlers, he said, want to know, they have 14 questions they'd like you to ask the tribes to verify that you were actually with the tribes of Libya. And so he gave us those 14 questions, and the head of the tribes of Libya, who's a good friend of ours, Sheikh Ali, he called a meeting, and they answered all those questions within 24 hours. That really shocked him. So then he came back and he said, my boss said he can't believe that there's two people in the Woodlands, Texas, who can pick up a phone and get more intel on the ground than we can. I said, well, we're trusted people. We sat with them. My blood ran in the street. And actually, we were the only Americans there that were not military or not military, but Blackwater or CIA or media, mass media. We were the only ones there. And the Libyan tribes told us, they said, you came to all our meetings, and at their meetings, they would put us in the front row and put the TV cameras on us because they wanted our faces there. They said, you've actually saved the face of America for the Libyans because you were here. He said, otherwise we would have a real hard time forgiving you or having anything to do with America after what happened to our country. But what happened with these guys that came into our house, as it went on, nothing was happening. As Jimmy said, they weren't taking any action. There was a time, it was near the end of April in 2013, when one of our tribal leaders called us and said, this is top urgent. There's a ship it looks like a fishing vessel. It's a big steamship, and it's full of weapons of mass destruction. It's heading for the port in Libya. And he said, I'm not sure which port, but it will be met by the Muslim Brotherhood, and they will take it across Libya into Egypt and across Egypt down into the Gaza. And these weapons of mass destruction are to be used on Israel. He said, we as Libyans don't, this doesn't really affect us, but we are so tired of seeing people dying. We can't stand it anymore. We want all this to stop, this horrible stuff.
They have nothing against real Jews.
They don't. They have nothing against them. So he said, if you can tell your people that ship is in the open waters right now, they can get it. So I called the one guy I had a number for. Eric Maddox didn't work on the weekends or nights, I guess. And the other guy that I had was a part-time policeman. So he had his phone working, and he said, I have contacts in Israel, but he said, I can't give him any intel because he said it's against the law for me to pass intel to him. I said, okay, I don't work for the intelligence agencies. I can pass intel to them. Give me their name. And Jimmy says I shamed him into doing it, but he eventually contacted them. And about 2 hours later, he sent me a smiley face back. He said, guess what that is? Apparently they got the ship. And then our Libyans told us, he said the Muslim Brotherhood were running around like chickens with their head cut off. They sent out a little boat. They couldn't find the ship. It had disappeared.
Now that ship, that was reported on the news, but it was reported as a Turkish vessel trying to offload equipment to Syria. Yeah,
no, it was completely
completely
convoluted of what it was. But the Mossad or the Israelis got it. I don't know who got it. In their government got it. But that was, the tribes have incredible intelligence on the ground, and they actually told us about Benghazi happening 6 weeks before it happened. They didn't tell us exactly what was going to happen, but I can still remember the call. They put a general on the phone. He was way out in the desert, and he said, there's going to be attack on American soil. American soil. He said, do you understand? American soil. He kept saying that. We couldn't really understand, but I tried to tell a lot of people in Washington that this was coming, and of course you can't get through any of the gatekeepers. After it happened, the Libyan tribes put together an offer to the people in Washington, D.C., to the Senate and the Congress, and they said if the U.S. would stop supporting al-Qaeda and the radical Islamists in Libya, they would clean their own country. And after that, they would go ahead and join all the tribes in all the other countries, and they would clean radical Islamists from all those countries, because the tribes, he said, inside the tribes, the Muslim people, we know how to clean this. We know how to do it.
But they said all these radicals are not Muslims. They have nothing to do with the religion. They're paid mercenaries. And that document, I think, is on our website. When nobody in Washington D.C. responded to that, they appointed us.
In Washington, you're talking about. You went to Trey Gowdy, Congressman Trey Gowdy. Claims the fame that he's getting to the bottom of Benghazi. You've gone to all of them. You've gone to all these AIPAC-controlled Senate and Congress. You want to throw some names out there, some of the ones you've gone to?
Sure. Louis Gohmert, Ted Cruz, ISIS, all of them. Yeah. All of them. And, we're going to set up a direct link with the tribal leaders. Never happened. And with Trey Gowdy, what happened, two of his biggest fundraisers are Big John Birch Society businessmen. And they said, after they heard our story, they said, oh, wow, we're going to put you in touch with him. We know he'll talk to you and meet with you because we're his biggest fundraisers. And a couple days later, they called us. They said, well, what did Trey Gowdy have to say? Well, he never called us. Oh, we'll get back to you. We don't understand that. So we opened up a call to Trey Gowdy. And his receptionist said, yes, we know who you are. We'll get back to you. Never have heard from him. Also, there was in January, after Chris Stevens was killed, There was an offer from the State Department, $10 million reward for information leading to the disclosure and arrest of the men that coordinated the attack on Benghazi. The names and addresses of those 3 guys were given to us by the tribal leaders that are in exile in Cairo, and we offered to give it to any government department in the United States. We tried to give it to all of them. Give it to them. Nobody to this day has ever asked us for that. Nobody wants to hear about it. Nobody wants to know about it.
Now, we also had a meeting. Do you know who Pete Sessions is?
Yeah.
Pete Sessions, yeah, he's the head of the Rules Committee. When we were in Dallas, there was a little group there that Activists for Truth. Their leader was a real pistol, and she got in Pete Sessions' face many times, and she told me,
because he was blocking the investigation on Benghazi.
She said he has a meeting with some of his cronies out there at a pistol range. They're going to shoot tonight, and I want you guys out there because that's the only way you're ever going to meet with him. And so we went to this little shooting range, and it was a huge storm that night, so very few people showed up. And she got right in his face, and he said, okay, I'll talk to your people. So after he did his little speech to the 7 people or whatever were there, he sat with us and listened to our story.
About 20 minutes, and he said, okay. He said, do you have any of these intelligence guys that you talk to? Can you call any of them? Joann said, sure.
So I called Eric Maddox because he had a burner phone for us. And he was real happy. Oh, hi, Joann, how are you? And I said, I'm fine. I'm sitting here with Congressman Pete Sessions. He'd like to speak to you. And he said, okay. So Pete Sessions told him, he said, listen, my name is Congressman Pete Sessions. This is my private mobile number. He gave it to him, and he said, I want you to call me back in 15 minutes. They do that so that he
told us, he said that's so they can verify
who he
that
is.
It's my number, etc. And sure enough, the guy called him back in 15 minutes. Pete walked out, talked to him about 30 minutes, came back in. He said, okay. He said, he's a real guy and you're real people. And he said, now I want you to tell me your whole story. And 2 hours in his own handwriting, he took down every detail of everything we had told him. All of our entire story.
He said, I'm going to go back and I'm going to talk to the DIA and I want to know why they didn't make you their best friends. Why the attack on you?
So 10 days later, he called us, good to his word. And he said, I called the head of a defense intelligence agency into my office. He wasn't happy at all coming to my office. He said, people come to my office. I don't go to theirs. And he said, then I asked him about you all. And he said, I want you to know that everything you told me, he said, I'm talking about everything you told me. You're blacklisted, soft-killed, targeted, etc., was validated. They admitted to it. He said, in addition to that, he said, in addition to that, he said, and this was his statement, here's 2 people sitting in the Woodlands, Texas, can pick up the phone and get actionable intelligence anywhere in Libya, and we can't get it from anybody. And Pete says, well, why didn't you make these 2 people your best friend instead of attacking them? And, of course, the guy didn't have the answer. He said, well, we hired them, but they wouldn't go to work for us. Absolute bald-faced lie. They never offered us a job.
They never offered us a dime. They never offered us anything. And Pete said, wait. He said, you're telling me you never worked for them? They never paid you? They never hired you? I said, that's right. And he was quiet for a minute. He said, well, these things happen in Washington, D.C. I guess I have to go back to him.
But now's a good time for me to tell you, Joann and I used to be very, very substantial people. We had 3 homes. Had a big home in the Portland area, one in the Woodlands, and one in Arizona. We sold everything because we, of course, had no income coming in. And we had paid stipends to all our engineers and scientists, sold our homes, rented back the one in the Woodlands. But we had absolutely no income coming in. All our bank accounts were raided. Nobody would do business with us.
All the Libyan bank accounts were taken. In fact, all the bank accounts of all the Libyan people were taken by Al-Qaeda. Everything was taken.
But our lives were ruined. We were really penniless. And so we were absolutely having to go to churches and people to try to help us. We couldn't get a job, couldn't get an interview. The 3 jobs that were offered to me were pulled. And we found out later on they were pulled because the people were threatened by the government. And so here we were, for all practical purposes, out on a limb. And we find out now we were blacklisted and soft-killed. And so one big church there in the Woodlands called the Crossroads Baptist Church had agreed to help us with rent. And they said, besides that, one of our people wants to incorporate your business. He's got an international oil field service company. We're going to move you into a smaller home, etc. And they were going to pay rent for us that month.
Well, time for rent came along and they weren't around. And so I sold a bunch of tools to repair or to rebuild antique cars. That's my hobby. Got about 10 cents on the dollar for them. Couldn't be replaced for anything. Paid our rent. And then we went back to the church to find out what happened. This is a $33 million church with $3 million excess budget. And one of the volunteer receptionists, who we had met several times late in the day, she said, I'm so sorry about what happened to you all. But, the government came in here and told us that they would do a complete audit on this church for 5 to 7 years if we helped you all. And she said that would cost us $500,000 or more. We just can't afford that. We don't know you that well. We're sorry. So they were attacking us behind our back all the time. We never knew that.
It wasn't too much longer that Eric Maddox gave a speech at that church.
Yeah, that's right.
That's how we found out who he was, because a flyer came in the mail from that church with his face on
it.
But
and his real name. When you're blacklisted by this government and they're trying to plant drugs and they threaten to kill us and everything, it's an environment that is foreign to everybody, really. And since we're business people, we're not political activists, this was such a hard thing for us to, first of all, accept. And then what do we do about it? Well, so what we've been doing since we've been going public, we tell our story. We tell what happened to us, what happened to Libya.
Also, we have a good friend in Dr. Jerome Corsi. Dr. Jerome Corsi writes for WorldNet Daily, and he's real well known. He's pretty famous. He has written many, many articles.
40 articles. With
information that we brought forward from the tribes. He's spoken to the tribes many times. We brought forward a document from the Libyan security that showed that Morsi was involved in the funding and planning of the attack on Chris Stevens.
And this
Morsi
also
now is the Russian. Now Morsi is the Turkish Khazarian.
Morsi was the Egyptian president puppet put in there. He was Muslim Brotherhood.
Okay.
And now they have a good guy in there. Yeah. The Egyptians took back their country.
But you want to know the link to Hillary and Bill? Bill and Hillary have been 30-year lifelong friends of Morsi and his wife. So was there a link to Benghazi directly to Hillary? Absolutely. And Morsi was that link.
That security report was read into the congressional record.
We've had actually 3 documents read into the congressional record, delivered via Jerome Corsi. One of them was the Egyptian embassy, U.S. embassy in Egypt, in Cairo.
This came forward from the tribes
was paying Muslim Brotherhood executives cash payments, $450,000 to $850,000 each, to 17 top Muslim Brotherhood executives in Egypt, and directly out of the front door of the U.S. embassy in Cairo.
The document is a picture. It's a picture of a document where these people had to sign for the money at the U.S. embassy.
And those men have all been to trial in Egypt. They are all under death sentence for traitors, as traitors, spies for the U.S.
Okay, now I want you to give out, because during the show, I want you to give out once again your website so everybody can get your CD. How much is your CD?
It's $15 plus shipping. It's $5 shipping unless it's international.
$20 for your CD. Give out your website again, because we're going to give it out a couple times here.
www.libyanwarthetruth.com. That's all one word. Libyan, LIBYAN WARTHETRUTH. LibyanWarTheTruth.com.
Okay, touch on the, because we got about 15 minutes left or 17. Touch on the whole Benghazi thing about Chris Stevens and being a gun drug runner and the ties in with Hillary and everything. Try to wrap it.
First of all, Chris Stevens came into Libya in 2006 as part of the UN team to dismantle the nuclear capabilities of Libya. So he was there way back there.
CIA.
He was with CIA then. Then later on, he became the gun runner to the rebels in Libya. And then he became the ambassador to Libya. And then 3 weeks after the no-fly zone had been established in Libya, Chris Stevens delivered 20,000 shoulder-mounted rockets. They were laying.
What date was that? What month and year was that?
That would have been in late March of 2011. 20,000 of them. And those were going out of Libya like a sieve. They were going out through Yemen through the Chad and Algeria. And these leaders of these other countries went to the United States and the U.S. and said, listen, these rebels are out of control and that the weapons flowing out of Libya are a danger to all of us. And so, finally there was enough pressure put on the United States that they knew they had to get these rockets back. So the night that Chris Stevens was killed, he had dinner with the ambassador from Turkey at that safe house, at that rented mansion in Benghazi. And the discussion that took on while they were having dinner, we know exactly what was said because the man serving those two dinner was a spy for the Libyan tribes. And so the discussion was about getting these 20,000 rockets back. And he was asking the Turkish representative of Erdogan is the leader of Turkey, said, we need him to use his influence to get these rockets back. We'll pay whatever they want for them, but we need to get them back. And the Turkish representative, for all practical purposes, told him to pound sand. And after dinner, he walked out the front door of that mansion, got in a fast car, was driven to the military airport at Benghazi, put in a military plane, and flown to Turkey. When the plane sat on the ground in Turkey, the three men that were coordinating the attack on that house began the attack.
Now, the area was cordoned off a day before. It was with yellow tape. 5
kilometers around that whole area was cordoned off.
It was a planned attack.
And the people protecting that house were Ansar al-Sharia. That is one of the most radical factions of Muslim Brotherhood and Al-Qaeda. And we know this because directly across the street from that house is another mansion that belongs to the son of one of the tribal leaders. And that night, he had gone to the little store to get some milk and water and stuff. And when he heard the first shots, he immediately jumped in his car and drove back the 30 seconds to his house. And as he was driving back, 2 cars exited the back of that mansion. 2 cars at high speed. Chris Stevens was not in either one of those cars. He pulled into his house, and of course it had a big metal gate, big enough for a car, then a small gate for a person. He pulled in there, closed the big gate. 2 guys were outside with guns, so he opened the little gate, which is a person-sized gate, and he said, well, are you all here to kill us? And he said they did not have Libyan accents, and they had funny clothes. They weren't Libyans. And they said, no, we're not here to kill Libyans tonight. We're here to kill Americans. And he said that whole firefight was taking place, and they burned that mansion. All the lights went out. All the electricity was blown. And after the fire went out, the first people in there were really mercenaries and looters. And they took him with them. They said, you come and go with us. And he said, he said, you don't refuse him. You have to act like they're buddies, otherwise they kill you. So he went with them reluctantly, and they went inside that. And he said it was very dark, and he said when they got in there was a body in there, and these guys were urinating on the body. They were abusing it. He said they were kicking it and everything. And finally they drug it outside, and it wasn't until they got the body outside that he realized it was Chris Stevens. And he said, at that point in time, he was already dead. And the things that they had been doing and were doing to him were unspeakable.
He said it was obvious to him that Chris Stevens was dead probably before the attack started.
Yeah.
And, he said it just doesn't make any sense that he, as the ambassador to Libya, would not leave in those 2 cars that took all the dignitaries out.
They have window chutes in all those houses like that. They have a window chute, and you just jump out the window and you're offloaded into a car and you head out of there. How they got out, how those 2 cars got out without him is a question that must be answered. But I can tell you, Trey Gowdy never talked to us, doesn't want to know the truth. Let me tell you something about the investigations that went on in Libya. Not one person that was not an employee of the U.S. government has ever been interviewed in Libya. Not one non-U.S. paid employee has ever been interviewed in Libya about what took place in Benghazi. Now that should tell you how much interest anybody in the U.S. government has in the truth about Benghazi. They don't want to know the truth.
You can put Hillary Clinton at the top of this one. There's no doubt in my mind that she knew what was going to happen, knew what was happening when it happened, and did nothing. And, you know, there's
Or worse.
there's only one sentence you can say, and everybody can take it the way they want. But this is my opinion, you know, dead men tell no tales.
Illuminati bitch.
Yeah, there's a lot of death around her.
Yeah. Well, you know, the things that we saw or that we knew for sure that she had done were unspeakable. And, you know, you bust a few eggs to make an omelet talking about human lives. Libya had 600,000 men, women, and children killed under the auspices of protecting the civilians.
25% birth defects.
They now have, the country is so infested with depleted uranium, they have 25% birth defects that don't live the first day. The instance of high blood pressure, cancer, 500% increases, cancer running rampant. They're seeing cancer that they've never seen before all over Libya. And,
this was really a naive, innocent country. They never bothered anybody. They never attacked anybody. Gaddafi was never behind any terrorist attack. That was all CIA. Every single thing that you believe he did was a lie.
But you know, the gold-backed currency for the continent of Africa would have destroyed the toilet paper bankers, the cabal bankers, the Rothschilds, and the Rockefellers. So, you know, they really wanted to get rid of Libya. Plus, in the meantime, they picked up $500 or $600 billion on the plus side. So they blew up Libya with its own money, killed more than 10% of the population. There's 2 million Libyans living in exile. Of the 3 million in country, 1 million are homeless. The other 2 million are living in fear. And the United States is still supplying weapons and more mercenaries via ISIS into Libya every day.
Via Turkey. The Libyans have restructured themselves to a degree to take back their country. They're fighting. The tribal military council and the Libyan army are working together to take back their country. But until a couple months ago, the UN still had an embargo on the Libyan army getting any weapons. However, they were supplying ISIS and Ansar al-Sharia and al-Qaeda with weapons in Libya all the time.
Now, our what we say is so outlandish, it's hard to believe. But I can tell you that we've been validated 100% by the Defense Intelligence Agency as having 100% accurate information about what goes on in Libya. We've been vetted by Pete Sessions and that bunch. So, you know, we're telling the truth. Now, it's cost us dearly. We're homeless. We live in a little home in deep southeast Texas that's a lake home, belongs to an elderly couple from Dallas. But they attack us. One time we pulled out of this little dirt road that we're on onto the hard surface. They snatched us up. They had us for 32 and a half hours interrogating us. Never would give us a badge. Never would tell us who they were. They kept telling us we can do this anytime. We can make you disappear. Nobody will ever know what's happened to you. And they said, we're doing it because we can. You all need to shut up, you know. But the thing is, God has protected us. And if we suffered an untimely demise tomorrow, I can promise you we'll be in a better place. So they can't scare us with death. And they don't understand that. But, you know, we have become very, very faithful people. God has protected us every time. And whenever we've really needed something, He's brought forward the cure for us. And, you know, I can't tell you, but the people of the United States need to get on their knees. They need to get back to the truth about what makes this world a valuable place to live. And it's not anything that has to do with Washington, D.C. That's a complete corrupt environment up there. And believe me, if they can do to us, and we're good people. We've had our own nonprofit forever. We funded small clinics in parts of the world out of our own pocket, you know. And we're good people. But if they can do to us what they've done, then everybody is at risk. And the thing...
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
The thing that we are is the more they threaten us, the more we try to tell the truth. The more people know us and know our story, the safer we are and the better they are prepared to handle what's coming.
We're eyewitnesses to what they did. And eyewitnesses rarely survive. It was a shock to them, I'm sure. In fact, the guy that was in our house from the DIA said to us one time, he said, you know, I never knew anybody who ever survived Al-Qaeda. He said, you should be in the Guinness Book of World
Nobody ever gets away from Al-Qaeda. Then a couple weeks later, he said, you know, you all weren't supposed to get out of North Africa.
Now, as you two are true Americans, you're bringing forth, your life's at risk. You do have a website. You got a CD. It's the only way you're surviving a CD, and everybody can see the proof and evidence, know all the lies of this government. And you brought it out. I had Scott Bennett on here talking about the money laundering of ISIS, and he knew it was a creation by DOD, and he knew that Al Qaeda was before his time, but he had heard that it was a creation of Al Qaeda, creation of our government, and of course the Israelis. Can't leave the Israelis out because they're part of it, the control box that they have over this country. What's your suggestion to people to do? You said part of it, prayer.
Well,
prayer works, and I know prayer works. That's one thing. But what's your other suggestions?
Next thing is demand that this country go back to our constitutional entity rather than the corporate entity that is running it. It's an illegal operation. The United States was hijacked, again, by the cabal bankers over money that was loaned, and the United States of America Corp is not a constitutional entity. All the states and all the judges and all the police departments and everything are corporations, not operating under constitutional law, but under statute. The people have to wake up and understand that our country has been hijacked by the bad guys, and we better wake up and get our country back.
Join the Liberty Alliance.
Whatever. The thing that's wrong is everybody knows that nothing happens in Washington, D.C. for the benefit of the people here. And I don't care if they're Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, whatever, they're all bad. There have been 2 people in Washington, D.C. that did not sign the allegiance to Israel document, and that was Ron Paul and Cynthia McKinney. All the rest of them have signed it, including Rand Paul. So, there's nobody in Washington, D.C. that is worth pissing on to put them out if they were burning up.
Most of the good ones in the military have been gotten rid of by Obama.
You know Cynthia McKinney. I mean, she was over there in Libya when they were being bombed too, wasn't she?
She was there with us.
She was there. We introduced her to the tribes.
We know her real well.
Yeah.
She's a great gal. Like I said, she's one of the only 2 that I know that did not sign the allegiance to Israel document. And look what that got her. She was not reelected, and that was by 1 vote, and they wouldn't recount the ballots.
And I think that happened to Dennis Kucinich as well.
It did. And, whoever thought we're really always considered ourselves conservative, God-fearing people, and liberals were not. But the person that was so closely aligned to our beliefs about what was going on in Libya was Dennis Kucinich. And we were in touch with him a bunch. His aide de camp, we'd been in communication with them a bunch. In fact, they arranged to receive a bunch of videos that we sent to them right before they were voting to additional fund the war in Libya. And he opened up a special site to receive those videos. They sent them to every man and woman in Congress and the Senate. And Ron Paul gave a real impassioned speech, and the funding to extend the war in Libya was defunded.
On what month and year was that?
That would have been probably
2011.
June 2011.
Yeah.
Okay, give out your website again and your CD for $20. You've got all this evidence on here. People can see it. We spread it around this country. Let people know
our
the truth.
presentation is on there too. Our live presentation.
It's 3 hours. It's got a lot of information on it.
Yeah, it's LibyanWarTheTruth.com is the website. www.LibyanWarTheTruth.com. If you put Joann Moriarty or Jimmy Moriarty, those sites will come up. There's also a Facebook site and a few other things.
Now we're adding a digital download to that DVD. It'll be a whole lot less money if they're interested. We should have that added in the next day or so.
We're working on it.
We're working on that. But, we need all the support. We need really the prayers of everybody in your audience, because that is what's kept us going.
And Stu, let me give you my email address, because sometimes
Give it out.
it's AITrust, AITRUST @gmail.com, AITrust. And sometimes the emails don't get to me from my website. It's got some glitches in it, I guess. I don't know. They play with it all the time.
Thank you so much for having us on your show. Sorry for the difficulties, but they do that to us all the time.
Hey, you do it to me every time I'm a guest on somebody else's show as well, and they used to hack me, but I told you how to take care of the problem.
There you go. Well, God bless you. God bless your audience. We pray for you all too.
All the veterans out there, God bless you for everything you do. All the military people, God bless you. I lived in the Marine Corps. I wasn't a Marine, but my first husband was, and I lived 13 years in the Marine Corps. So I understand y'all and your comradeship and who you are. You're great people.
Well, I served in the Marine Corps, and it was a trip, but you know, days going to come, all that training that I had, I'm going to get to use it on certain public officials, and they're not going to like it when that happens.
Sure. That's right.
Well, you know, I'm a Texas man, and the whole time we were in Libya, they never would let me have a gun or anything to defend myself. They said, if you're caught with a weapon, Al-Qaeda will for sure kill you, and if not, maybe they'll let you go, but never would give me a gun, an RPG, nothing.
Well, we're out of time, and James
God bless y'all.
Joann
Thank you so
Moriarty, I thank you very much, and I'll have you on again here soon.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Stu.
God bless you.
Good night, folks, and I'll